Bienvenido al podcast oficial de nuestro equipazo en Filantropía Puerto Rico, Somos Filantropía. Estas conversaciones profundizan, visibilizan y amplifican los esfuerzos que adelantan la equidad dentro del ecosistema social de Puerto Rico. Nuestros invitados compartirán sus perspectivas sobre temas sociales desde sus experiencias y especialidades. Así que busca un espacio cómodo, sírvete un café de aquí, claro está, y danos oído.
Saludos y bienvenidos a otro episodio de Somos Filantropía, el podcast de Filantropía Puerto Rico. Y hoy tenemos un episodio súper especial y es un poco continuación de otros dos episodios que les comentaremos, pero vamos a cambiar de idioma porque hoy tenemos una invitada especial de una organización hermana de Filantropía Puerto Rico y le contaremos de eso ahora. Así que hacemos el cambio. Welcome to today's episode of Somos Filantropía. We are super happy to have Rachel Leonidas from ProInspire. Rachel, welcome.
Yes. Hey, welcome, y'all. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
So Rachel is in Atlanta today, but we were in person not too long ago. And so Rachel, you are the communications manager for ProInspire, which is a sister organization, I would say, to us, because you're also a philanthropy serving organization. Right?
Yes.
Would you say that?
Yeah.
And we met, and I just want to give context to, I'm sorry, for the ones that are not looking at us or just listening to us. We have Carla Vargas.
Hello.
Today. The ones in video, they saw us. We're in family. So we met, it's been like 4 years now, or maybe, 4 years. So we've been participating in a cohort or a community of practice of several organizations like us, philanthropy serving organizations, and we started creating together to really learn about listening and having practices that we can share with our membership about listening practices, and that has shifted a little bit more into, or has refined into going into listening, responding, and shifting power. And guys, I know that if you follow our podcast, you've heard about this before in our other chapters that we talked about. But we wanted to invite ProInspire today to continue this conversation. And we were just in a trip not long ago in Savannah, Georgia, that we met in person. All of us PSOs to really come together and check out tools and create roadmaps of how we can continue to work and leverage each other and all the learnings that we've done. So Rachel, I'm super excited to have you here and to get this conversation started. You participated in our annual convening, was it 2 years ago? ProInspire came.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
It's been a while, but I need to come back.
Yes, you do. Yes, but I'm happy to say that we've been able to work together, and for us in Puerto Rico, sometimes it's kind of hard to have people that we can collaborate with, just because maybe the context is different or our model is a little different. But we've been happy to be able to continue to collaborate with you guys. So I have a question. I love ProInspire's name. Where does it come from? What inspiration happened that it was ProInspire? What's the story there? Is there a story?
That's a very interesting thing. There's a little bit of a story, but I don't know if it's so much so around the name, but around our founder, Monisha Kapila, who left us. She succeeded last year in 2023. And as you guys know, like organization is now led by 2 Black women, Bianca Anderson, Isabel Moses. But yeah. I think if we were to think about the name, that inspire part, right? How do we professionally inspire people to activate their leadership? To accelerate equity throughout the world. Though, yes, ProInspire focuses on racial equity as a way to advance equity overall. We are in that intersectional work broadly in equity. So I would imagine that inspirational part was a big part. How do we professionally inspire? Personally, Yes, but because ProInspire work with leaders, nonprofits, and in foundations, how do we professionally inspire people to activate their leadership to focus on equity? So
Yeah.
that is a little bit of the story behind our name. There's more. There's always a bigger story. There's always a
Right.
marketing team. But our organization is 15 years old. So
Oh,
I
wow.
wasn't
Nice.
there when the name was first established, but I do know that there's association on how do we inspire or pro-inspire, if you will, folks to work on important issues of advancing equity here in the United States, and spill over throughout the world. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I love it. I feel like now that you said professionally inspired, that even takes it to another level. But for me, it's very much like, or my interpretation was like, really act from the inspiration that is coming
Yes.
from these practices and what you're learning
Absolutely.
and what you're going through. Because I know a lot of your methodology, I would say, in working with funders, and you correct me, and I want you to speak more, is really looking inward, from the individual self and kind of going outward. So if you could share a little bit about things that you do and how you do it, would love to hear that.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I love your interpretation because that's really exactly what it is. We do want to inspire people to work on issues. And part of that inspiration comes, it starts with self first. So that's a big part of how ProInspire feels. We have a self to systems model or approach at ProInspire when we train and when we work with organizations. This leadership model just talks about that there are levels of leadership and different practices that you have to embody and learn. And they're very intersectional. So they're not linear, but it's the idea that you start with yourself. So what is it that individual leaders need to do at the leadership of self, right? What are practices and behaviors and things they need to learn and unlearn to be the social impact change makers that they want to be? And then that should spill over to your relationship. So the windows go self, people. So how are equitable with other people from different cultures, societies that share differences from us? When we work with people, how are we equitable there? So we go from self, people, and organizations. How does organizations live into practices, align their values so that the policies, the ways of being, the procedures that we adopt at the organizational level are also equitable. And that should all bubble it up into the systems. So self to systems, right? At every level of leadership, there are things that we need to do. And at the systems level, how are we reimagining different ways of leading, being, doing life, being in community that better serves our communities and make it a better place, like help us to address the issues we need to address and leave a better world for future generations and even right now for ourselves.
Yes, I love how you say that. Even right now, for ourselves. Agree on that one.
No, I mean, what I love is that we always talk about like learning and learning in the social sector and learning how to do things differently. But what I love is that you're always trying to push like the unlearning side and how do we listen there? And what are the lessons that we can take away from unlearning? I mean, that word is actually, it's very interesting. And it's very interesting because it match with listening well, which is something that you always push. And we talked earlier in Savannah.
Yeah. No, when I was in Savannah and even when I know we shared space at the table, we talked so much. I think that listening undergirds this whole process of, how listening, communicating, responding, shifting, all these things. Listening is one of those things that kind of undergirds this process of, like you said, learning and unlearning. And when you start with self, the biggest blind spot sometimes we often have in our leadership and often have in practices is the fact that we don't make time to listen, right? We don't really think about the role of listening to ourselves, to others, to community, so that we can be precise about the changes. And the unlearning invites everyone to the table. Sometimes the learning, we say, oh, certain people need to learn stuff, so we need to educate ourselves. But I think sometimes when we use the unlearning part, it's like, what have you learned that wasn't right, right? What do you need to unlearn that is different, right? Well, how do we respond to the needs of now, right? And sometimes everybody needs to think about, what do I need to unlearn? Rachel, what do you need to unlearn in your leadership, right? And in order for you to really understand what you need to unlearn, Carla, to your point, that listening element is key. Because listening gives you what? Feedback, right? And that it shifts your posture from always giving out, talking, sharing, but hearing, right? And then what we do with that hearing is what ProInspire helps to support leaders to do. When you start getting information or hearing things differently, how do you stay open, right? To shifting, to listening and hearing and unlearning the things you need to unlearn, so that we can advance our missions and visions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
like
I see unlearning as a tool to being accountable to what actually I hear. I mean, I'm listening to the communities, I'm listening to the social sector, and the unlearning side is actually how I'm responding to it. It's like an accountability to the social sector, and to our allies and partners and communities, because I'm listening to you, I'm trying to unlearn my practices, and I'm trying to learn how I do things, and I'm trying to implement and basically adapt. Adapt to your reality, and trying to search for best practices to engage.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, it's not a matter of, I think we focus very much sometimes on adding and learning versus sometimes it's really just gotta unlearn or let go of some things like rules of beliefs that we individually have that doesn't allow us either to listen or shift and share in different ways. I'd love to hear, Rachel, maybe you talked about self and people and organizations and systems. So you have this framework, which I think it's basic, and basic, fundamental, what I meant. Where do you kind of implement it, or where have you seen that it works? Like you see that within funders, within nonprofits, within collectives? Just wondering, have you had the opportunity to I can feel that it goes everywhere, right? But I'm just wondering how people interpret, from the self. So the people, who is it? The people, is it in the organization? Is it my family? Is it my community? Is it my organization? Then, just wondering how you see that. And to another point, echo a little bit of what you said, again, from what I was understanding from listening to you. You mentioned clarity, and listening. So I think listening to oneself really allows clarity of oneself to then, when you listen and see any contrast or something different, and that you need to, instead of adding, you need to let go, then it's easier to notice that. And sometimes we're listening to ourselves to then, let's add, let me learn, instead of let me listen, let me clear of me, with all the good and the bad, and then I can start being open of what to go. Anyway, but I want to know a little bit more how you engage this model and how is it seen?
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me to reflect on how we're doing it at ProInspire. And as you were talking, I was like, let me think about the best way to communicate. So we have our self-to-systems leadership model, right? That we believe help to advance racial equity throughout the nonprofit sector, foundation, philanthropy. And we're world, but we see this model as a treatment, if you will, right? It is an approach. And so the way we do this is that foundation, I love the word that you said there, when you clarify that word, that foundation serves as the lens that we apply when we work with leaders, with individual leaders. So even at ProInspire, our organizational structure, we have kind of services at each of those levels as well. So at ProInspire, the way we support individuals, and we always put that in the self and people bucket, the way we support individuals is that we provide individual training on both exploring identity, right, and managing people in power. Because usually when we think about anything that happens in the world, the first thing is how people perceive themselves and then how people interact with others. That's usually where a lot of the issues and a lot, right?
Yeah,
a lot of the successes,
but
organizations are a collection of people, right? And the systems, it bubbles up into community in the world. So it's still a collection of people. So what we do at ProInspire is we provide individual trainings that people can just register for, which helps them explore identity. What has the world said about who you are? What do you need to learn and unlearn, right? We have this 3A model. Active learning and unlearning is the first A, right? What intentional actions do you need to take? And the third thing, what is the process of accountability? So in the leadership model, we have these 3As. And so when we work with individual leaders, we say, let's explore your identity. What do you need to actively learn and unlearn, right? What are the actions you need to take as a leader to become a better leader? Once you realize what you need to learn and unlearn, right? What is the actions you need to take based off of what you're learning and unlearning? And then how do you hold yourself accountable? Now, that's usually where it falls short. What are the processes of accountability to make sure, right, that if healing is something, if coaching is something that you need, right? If you have any internalized feelings about yourself, or if you have biases against people, we need to clean that up. Right. And so ProInspire has trainings around how do you support leaders to do that at an individual level. Now, how do you support leaders while they're doing that as the individual level, not to harm other folks when they're doing it, right?
Because this is a process also. It's not like you get to a place. I think it's kind of a continuous process that it unfolds in a way.
I love that you said that, Glenise. It's a continuous process, and listening. Right? Listening is a fundamental thing. As you are learning and unlearning and taking different actions, how are people responding to you? Right? That is something you need to listen and take in, process, and say, that didn't land well. What happened? Should I check in? Right? And so we teach leaders, how are you equitable in your management when you're managing different people? How do you manage better? Right? Because when people and teams work better, right, then we can really work on the objectives of the organizations, if you will, or the things that we need to accomplish as an organization. And once we move through equitable management, interpersonal relationships, that's what we're talking about, interpersonal relationships. So you go from self to people. Then when we talk about, so at ProInspire, we have those trainings at the self and people level. We have fellowships that we have for senior leaders. And to look at their individual leaders, leadership. So we have fellowships, we have trainings. Then we do org work, right? And org work really talks about the policies that you have, the practices of an organization. And so when we look at our model, when we work with organizations, we do the same thing. We still take a self-to-systems approach with the organization. We say, who are the leaders that should be part of this change work? Where are the board members? So we work at all levels, even when we work with organizations. But what we understand about organizations is if we don't make sure they align their values to the policies and the practices, nothing at the organization will change. And the missions are not moving forward, right?
And writing down the agreements after
Correct.
you've done this process. It's like, let's kind of manifest the agreement.
Let's codify this. Let's share it. Let's work on it for a while. I love when you said this is a process. Yes, this is not a checkbox thing. This is a commitment, right? So our leadership model has commitments at every level. This is a commitment to the work, because if we're not committed to this process, this ongoing process, and using listening as a tool to do this, then I don't know what we're doing, right?
We're just going by.
We're just existing and making ourselves feel better, right? But are we really doing good work, and are we maximizing on the work that we want to do collectively in the sector? And then philanthropy. Let's get to philanthropy real quick. Philanthropy is a real philanthropy is a really interesting place because it's very unique, the kind of power that foundations have, but at the same time, and understanding where they're situated in the ecosystem. So philanthropy are big power players oftentimes in the ecosystem because of the resources that they can bring in. So ProInspire really sees, with our Here to Listen program, when we think about systems work, that is the reason why ProInspire works with philanthropy. We see individual, we have our trainings for individual, we do our org training work with foundations and nonprofits. But when we think about the work of systems work, how do we reimagine systems? We see philanthropy as partners in that, right? And we want to make sure they too are doing the work inside their foundation and them as philanthropic leaders, so that when they engage with community, right? When they do the work of response, when they do the work of grant making, they're doing that in the most equitable way possible. And so ProInspire, with our Here to Listen tool, we really felt like listening was one of those pieces that are really critical in philanthropy because of the power that they have, right? Because of the way they can resource differently, and a part of our ecosystem that we depend on for change, for acceleration. And let's just be frank, in time of crisis, philanthropy is one of the systems, right? One of the sectors that can respond a little bit differently than government.
Definitely.
And
quicker, more risky.
Yeah, exactly. Can be a little bit more risky, can be a little bit more daring. And so we see philanthropy as players and partners in doing this. And we want to go inside foundations and say, how are you listening, right? How are you as a leader from self, and go all the way through systems with philanthropy. Yeah,
definitely. Do you want to tell us about the Here to Listen? I love these cards.
Yes.
How do you call this deck?
I'm trying to see if we have the card deck, our Here to Listen card deck, which is a suite of conversational cards that has practices at all levels. So I just went through the self systems, and we have these cards, and I can drop the link. I'll make sure I share the link with you guys so that you can share, because we have a virtual card deck that for free to anyone who wants to be able to download. Yes. And they have these practices and questions that you can work on yourself, but at every level: self, people, orgs, and systems. We have practices, we have questions, and that you can engage with in these cards. So our Here program is both a conversational card deck, which is a free virtual tool, and it's a training program custom made for foundations, and now being also customized for nonprofits as well.
Sweet.
Here is an acronym. All right. So here is our listening model, is a model for listening that we engage with philanthropy. And H stands for honored lived experience. Our E stands for exemplifying equity. Our R in here stands for responsive, right? How we're responsive. And E, how do we stay engaged? And so our HERE model for listening supports philanthropy foundations, philanthropic leaders on better listening practices so they can shift and change, right? So they can look at the power they have and leverage equitable listening in order to do the good work that they seek to do.
Yeah, I love your names. I love the now. Because at first, for me, when I heard about this initiative, it was here to listen, and now it seems that it's more here, like the name, which I love because I heard it and I felt like presence, right? Like I'm here.
Presence.
So to listen and to share experience and all this, you need to be like here. So I love your names.
Thank you. It's a play on words. It's like you need to be here. And when you are here, you need to make sure that you are honoring lived experience, that you're exemplifying equity, when you are engaging with community, when you're present, when you are, when your experiences that you're having at convenings, when you're talking to members of the community, in your grant making, you need to be here. You need to be present, right?
Yeah.
And then we feel like listening is one of the most powerful ways to make sure that you are shifting power, right? Not everyone always listening to you, but how are you listening to others, right? In your response to community. So yeah, I love it. And I'm glad that you got it. That made me so happy, Glenise, that you get
it. It's perfect.
Yeah.
I'm curious, you mentioned accountability, even in your self to systems model, and even here in the here. But Carla, when we came back from our Savannah trip and our community of practice trip, that we kind of spoke and did a reflection of everything we learned and how we were feeling. It was like our self moment of reflection, and we were sharing it together. We spoke a lot. I mean, we talked, obviously listening is like the theme, but accountability is another big I think, or for me personally, like important thing that we should talk about, because I think, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this and how you see it, and maybe how you practice it or bring it to be expressed. Because in that podcast, we were talking much about, there's listening, and there's so much, especially with funders, there's so much recognition that, they have power. So it's like you have to listen, but at the same time, there comes responsibility within all this from both parts, the listening and the transmitter and the receiver, and vice versa. So just wondering your thoughts, and how do you put accountability within this approach?
Yeah, and I was like also thinking on that topic, that this is something that I'm always trying to answer in my head. How does actually an organization that implements this co-leadership that you were talking, structure, and this here tools, all of these words that means here, and this accountability, besides learning and unlearning, how does an organization that implements those kind of tools in their structure looks like? What do you think about accountability, sharing the power, and also how actually an organization looks like doing this? We have a lot of nonprofits and also funders and grant makers listening to us, and I think it will be very good from your side to share how do you think about those terms, and how actually in practical ways we can maybe put into practice.
Yeah.
Do you use your deck eternally? Is that the question?
Exactly.
Do you have a Monday meeting? Okay, let's
listen.
So
Those
here's
measures,
the card of the day.
yeah.
like
Those
every
measures
morning on Slack. This is the card. That's
those
a good
measures,
idea.
it is. It
Get a
is.
Slack app that gives a card every day.
Mm. That is a great idea. And if they join our listserv, they'll start to get that. You know, accountability is a tricky thing when you have power, when you're in the seat of power, right? And that is one of the reasons why ProInspire is dedicated to working with foundations from the inside out. Because if we're not changing the internal culture around accountability and the importance of doing this work and seeing it from there's accountability from self to system. So when we talk to individual leaders, we ask ourselves, how are you holding yourselves accountable? So sometimes as an individual person, you need a coach or you need an accountability partner. So at the individual level, we tell people, yes, you know, you set out your goals as an individual leader. And then at the end of the year, you tell yourself, did I reach those goals? Yes or no, right? Sometimes individuals can be held accountable a little bit more easier. Then when we talk about organizations and foundations, right? When we talk about those who have a little bit more power, especially when we talk about philanthropy, who, you know, they're in the seat of power. So if they say, you know, well, yeah, we're going to do it. And if they didn't do it, who's going to really hold them accountable?
Yeah.
So that question around accountability is such a powerful one. It's such a hard question. It's such a hard question to answer.
Well, that's why we asked it.
I see Philip.
I don't have the answer. That's what I'm asking you.
I see Philanthropia and other PSOs as one of those folks in the ecosystem of change that holds that accountability space, right? PSOs who challenge and learn and work with and elevate and celebrate and push, right? And so sometimes is when you are in the network, you know, this is what we believe at Philanthropia. This is what we believe our funders should be doing, right? So there's a North Star. So PSOs can play a role. So ProInspire always work adjacent because we are kind of PSO-ish. You know, we also we're intermediary. So we work on both sides. But the reason why we're always in the PSO space is because these convenings are in an important place to hold for accountability at the org and systems level. What are we doing? We ask the big picture questions and we evaluate how well did we respond to this crisis? What were the mistakes? Who sits in the seats of bubbling that up? So PSOs are a really key player here. The second thing I think is community, and this is why listening is important. We can have big picture goals. When ProInspire works with foundations, this is what we see. They set something out. They want to support their grant makers. They have all these metrics and numbers in place and how they're going to do their grant making according to their strategy. And then at the end of the day, we just have to look in community, right? And say, is it changing? Is it getting better or worse? Are we regressing, right? Are we improving? And sometimes we can close our eyes and say, or make something up to make ourselves feel better. But there's something around the community, the world, right? The people that you're working with gives you feedback around how well are your strategies. They are the accountability metrics, if you will. And this is why we at ProInspire, we do believe in working with foundations on how are you receiving your feedback? Because that is really the point of accountability. That question around how well are you listening? What is the feedback you're getting? And even when you disagree with the feedback, You have to understand that that is the way it is being perceived and received, right? That is the way the community, your grantees, that is the perception that they're having. And so that feedback is important. And I think we always have to continue to shift and push philanthropy to say, it sounds great, but we must do something different, right?
Yeah.
How, we keep hearing, for example, in philanthropy, we need kind of GNA support. We need more GNA support. We need more GNA support, right? So the more and more people are saying this, after a while, it's like, are you listening? Right? Are you listening?
Yeah.
Do you want to change? And so I think that the accountability is tricky, but one area of accountability I do see that we have seen that's been successful is when we work with individual leaders in foundations or in philanthropy, we do ask them, how's your well-being? Do you feel like you're accomplishing your goals? Are you thriving? What do you need? There's something about asking individual leaders those questions. And what are the things you have in place to make sure that you're checking in on those cards, right? That you're reading up, that you're reading up on the latest things that are needed. What do you have in place? And sometimes a lot of senior leaders that work in foundations or leaders at all levels, because ProInspire working leaders at all levels of leadership. Well, one thing we say is get some coaching, get an accountability partner, get networked, with organizations like Philanthropia. Get networked so that you can hear and assess your own leadership. So in the area of accountability, we saw like individual accountability, how we work with individual, how we coach them, how we talk to them about ways they can implement and stay accountable. We've seen some progress there. Now, organizations, we press the button, we press the gas with them. We go to the policy, right? Put it in your policy. Put it in your policy. Codify that, we're going to increase, our grant making strategy. We're going to try a spend down approach in one area right here. We want to see you write that down and make that public, right? And I think that part around codifying your policy, moving things into your policy is a sure way that you hold yourself accountable at the organizational level or within or inside of a foundation. Right. And when we work with clients, we often want to say, what will change in your policy as a result of doing this work? So accountability looks different at different levels, but I will tell you now, it's not easy holding philanthropy accountable.
Yeah, I know. We know. No, but I actually love the relationship of knowing your story.
Yeah.
And like, if you know the story and you actually recognize your identity and your position, you actually can strategize from there. I mean, if we only understood the value and the power of listening and understanding the stories and recognizing our position and recognizing our identity and our decision to strategize with key players, even recognize the key players. Who are the key players in our decisions? Those are the questions that I'm trying to always answer on my mind. Who are the key players when I make this decision in the social sector? I mean, is just the community, or is the community the funders? What are the realities around that decision that you're gonna make? It's all about that accountability. You have to recognize the key players, their identities, your identity, and actually their stories to actually listen well.
Yeah, and I love that you said that, Carla, because I think leaders of color, especially, we hold ourselves accountable to our own lived experience. We know what we need. We see our communities. We love our communities. And there are, I love, who are the key players that you could hold yourself accountable to. And sometimes that's in your faith as well, that you answer to a bigger power. So I love working with individual leaders when you process why do I care about this work is a really great accountability question, right? why am I doing this? And that's why we love to work with leaders at the individual levels. With orgs and philanthropy, we just go ahead and tell y'all what y'all need to do. But even individuals in foundations, in philanthropy, people who are working as individuals, we ask the question. That's a great way to remind people, are you accountability to your mom? Who raised you?
Mhm.
Why are you accountability to your family? Are you an accountability to, because they represent, why are you doing this work, right?
Yeah.
So every leader asking themselves the question, why are they doing this work? Why this organization? Why this foundation, right? Why are we aligned with this mission? So a great
Yeah.
accountability metric is to always ask ourselves, who are the stakeholders? Why are we doing this work? Why are we in it? And sometimes when you're working as a leader, you get tired, you get frustrated. You got to remind yourself, why am I doing this? And as a Haitian American,
Yeah.
I'm reminded of my own community. I stay committed, right, to the work that is still needed to do in Haiti, to the history of Haiti that still needs to be shared. And that's why I continue to fight for equity across, right? Because of our lost stories and our lost history. So I just love how you tied that in, that identity piece and that asking the question. Sorry, Clarice, did I cut you off? But I felt so.
Well, I'm echoing. I'm echoing. I mean, in my mind, I'm following you and echoing everything you're saying. I see it very much. There's an accountability to you and to your dreams as well, and what wants to be expressed out of you, which goes into other realms. And sometimes we're not even accountable to us and what we really desire in our hearts to be created and experienced and manifested, which goes, to the organization, to the systems level, and to all other areas. So I love the approach. It's just very, very great. I remember when you guys presented in our convening 2 years ago that you began with an exercise of the whole group. Remember, we were in a circle, and you asked something about the leadership style, and they had to
Get a metaphor. Yes.
Yes. I was like, this is great. And if you listened carefully, you would learn so much about other people, which is amazing, just by such a simple example. Because sometimes we don't have to make this like an academic thing of, let me listen,
Yeah. And also something that I like on that topic is that you always, on that exercise and also in Savannah, you were trying to teach us something about listening is not always like listening to a word. Correct. You can listen with your body. You can listen with your sensation. Like, I don't know, you did something about like a story when we were kids, and how do you feel about this exercise? What do you remember? And most of us didn't remember like a word, like in a specific word, but we actually remember how that experience make us feel, how our body feels. And we actually put ourselves in our imagination, like in that place. We can actually saw ourselves in that scenario, but we didn't like remember the word. So that was actually interesting, because you always try to teach us that listening is not about words, it's about what it's like in between or something like that.
Not verbal, what you remember. That's all about listening. And we deploy so many different strategies to help people understand that there are things, like you said, listening happens in 3D, right? And in kind of more standard approaches, listening is, someone says something, you read what I'm hearing is, and then we write it down, and then that is it. Hopefully we shift from that. But there's so many different things, especially within communities of color, that we listen to. We listen to who's not in the room, who wasn't there. right? We connect our feelings, and our feelings tells us something about what's happening. All of those things are important. And if leaders in the social sector dealing with all types of people in their management, in their grant making, in the way they do policies, if they're not understanding that different types of people receive messages differently. So we went to Geo, and Brittany and I did a session on, and Brittany is with Native Americans in philanthropy. We did a session on cultural listening practices around the world, and it's different. There are different methods that are deployed based off of where you're from, what your family values. And that's why we do that exercise, because oftentimes leaders do not know, and leaders are just, organizations are a collection of leaders and people. They do not know why they respond in a certain way. Why do certain things trigger them, right? Oh, I remember how that made me feel. And we want to call that up. So when you're working with community, or when you're working with a manager, or when you're working on a team, you can understand how different people can have different perceptions, right? And how do we work through that to accelerate? So that's not a barrier, right, to the work that we're trying to make.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, the receiving side is the one who puts meaning to what's being communicated. And they should be accountable to that meaning, which is a very individual thing. So it's an interesting exercise. I love it. What's up with you guys in this 2020, very interesting 2024 and maybe 2025? How are you looking up to the
almost
future?
2025? Almost 2025.
We buckling our seatbelts. That's what we do. We buckling our seatbelts. ProInspire is sitting and looking at how, equity is taking a backwards, it's taking a turn, right? And we know that the political season is coming up, and the election season, and that is going to just impact a lot of what foundations can or cannot do, and what the government does, and the legal actions, that can take. So we're not backing down from the work we are doing, but we are considering those things, and we are doubling down on our efforts of understanding, even in uncertain times, that work of equity is critical, because if it impacts the greater society, how much more does it disproportionately impact other people? Decisions on climate change, we know, will impact Puerto Rico. What is going on? How are we investing? How are we resourcing and making our communities resilient in the face of environmental issues? I know that's top of mind for anyone is seated in the Caribbean and even around the world. Like, we are seeing the impacts of it. And so we're buckling our seat down, and we want to say, we have to take a look at equity. Listen, we can't ignore that, because different communities are going to feel the impact of different things disproportionately and differently. And so, so some exciting things that we have coming up is we have a report coming out on conditions for thriving. We're going to share that with foundations. We're taking an asset frames approach on what allows leaders to do well. We're tired of always looking at what's wrong and what's going on. Right. And so now we're going to be releasing a report in August on conditions for thriving for BIPOC leaders, so that philanthropy can take a look at, when they're funding, fund what's going well, fund what will actually support thriving. Right. So we're excited about that part. And then we have a learning series that's free to the organization, that's free to everyone that can be a part of. We have a foundation open house. I'm not sure, it's June 20th. So probably by the time this comes out, it will be not there, but we would have a recording. Yeah, we have a recording. Perfect. People can reach out to us at proinspire.org to kind of learn more about what we do. So we have some exciting things that are happening. Stay tuned with ProInspire, and I love y'all.
Yes, we have one more question, but I want to be sure we're going to share all this and your contact, Rachel, in case somebody wants to reach out to ProInspire and learn more of the services and things that you offer. Yeah, I think you answered it, but I'll ask it. We always end up asking, how do you advance a more equitable Puerto Rico? Obviously, in your case, I know you don't directly work in Puerto Rico, but I'm sure you work with others that in some way might, trickle down to Puerto Rico. So just wondering, and I know we've talked about this, but how do you advance an equitable society, an equitable world?
Yeah, I think one of the big ways that we do it is that, we believe in partnering with people and getting practical about ways of doing it. I think that we always share high level things. We're always sharing data. We're always sharing information and practical practices, through our leadership model and through our report that's coming up on conditions for thriving. So we help to contribute to advancing a more equitable world because ProInspire partners with people and walk the journey out with them. And we want to work the journey out. The second thing that may tie to Puerto Rico is ProInspire is dedicated to elevating the fact that leaders of color around the world, right, from all different places, can contribute greatly. They have the answers, right? And so with this report on conditions for thriving, what we're saying is too many times we take a look at different places around the world who it's like, oh, they have a negative lens. How can we help? How can we support? Right. There's always a deficit framework, right?
Right.
And so ProInspire want to surface the assets. And we know that the people of Puerto Rico, we know philanthropia, we know there is a story, there's a powerful story. There are powerful contributions from leaders that come out, that foundations can partner with real people, nonprofits in Puerto Rico and in stateside with those from in the diaspora, right? We work with those in the diaspora to say that they've made powerful contributions and that there are great things that we can contribute to the world. And it's not always a response of how you can help, but how can Puerto Ricans help us, right? Because there are things that we know, there's contributions that are being had. And so when we talk about the work of racial equity, we think about how do we surface the amazing work and leadership in Puerto Rico and in the United States and around the world of leaders, right? And how do we resource? When we think about resourcing Puerto Rico, so this is what we share with philanthropy. When we think about resourcing anywhere, right? How do we resources conditions that continue to help these leaders thrive, right? It's the both and. Yes, there are challenges, but also there are wonderful contributions that are happening. How do we surface both? And I think that that's how ProInspire contributes to a more equitable world when we're not always looking at people by the total of what's wrong in their communities, their deficits, the gaps, but they are first approaching out on that every community have contributed greatly to the world, to the environment, to their communities. How do we source and fund both things? Both what can they do to thrive and what do they need, right? Because we don't want to ignore the problems. What do they need to support? We don't only want to focus on the problems. We want to resource the stress, right? Because that's how we accelerate growth. So I think that's what ProInspire contributes to society, to the ecosystem, to nonprofit, to foundation, and in some way to right there in Puerto Rico as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. I appreciate ProInspire and the relationship we've created in these last couple of years. So thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for your time, Rachel.
Until next time.
Yes. And thank you for all the ones who listened to this episode. We'll be back with more. So hear you or see you soon. Bye.